After years of medical school, my wife now wants to be a housewife. I'm not on board. Hello, I, 32F, have been with my wife, 31F, since our second year of high school. From what I remember, she has always wanted to become a doctor. A pediatric doctor to be exact. While I kept changing my mind and was continuously unsure about what I wanted, my wife was extremely dedicated to wanting to be a pediatric doctor. I've seen her study her butt off in college and cry from frustration as she studied. Seeing her work so hard gave me the motivation to finish school and become a lawyer. We've been each other's biggest supporters throughout this journey. From working odd jobs to support ourselves, having cheap dates at the park and crying from stress and frustration, it was like finally seeing the end of the tunnel with my partner next to me the entire time. We got married right after I graduated from law school and started living in a bigger place with the money we had saved together. She finished her internship this year and is about to legally become a licensed doctor. However, her happy tune about becoming a doctor suddenly changed. I'm not really sure when her obsession with becoming a housewife started, but seeing her go from being a career-oriented woman with hopes and dreams to wanting to become a housewife gave me severe whiplash. I just couldn't understand what could make her change her mind so suddenly. I tried asking about it and she said something along the lines of, "I just want to cook and clean for you. Live a simple life." I assumed that maybe she was feeling lonely since I've been working a lot, so I told her that we'd go on more dates and spend more time together, but again she insisted that she wanted to be a housewife. Don't get me wrong, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a housewife, but to give up your long years of studying and hard work to stay home and cook is absurd. We're already splitting the chores at home and we've just been on very equal footing since forever. I just can't seem to read her. Maybe being a doctor just isn't for her. Or perhaps she got bored. I just don't get it. I want her to do what makes her happy because I truly love her and she's my entire world, but is stopping everything and throwing away the chance of having one of the most respectable jobs on earth just to stay home and do chores really worth it? Maybe I'm asking the wrong questions. Maybe she's trying to tell me something and I'm being dense. I wish I could read her mind. I just don't get it. At the end of the day, I just want to know why and maybe convince her otherwise. As much as I think that's a bad idea, it's still her life, but I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive myself if I let her throw her career away. Comments. Toaster child. I worry about the lack of communication between you two. She's expressing a desire but not saying why. You want to guess the reason but don't want to ask her for some reason. You also want to talk her out of it without even knowing her reasoning. Are you totally against it no matter what, or just totally against it because you are making huge assumptions about why? OOP. Hello. I must admit that my initial reaction wasn't great. I had given her all the reasons as to why it's not a good idea to throw her hard work all away and assumed the possible reasons all on my own. Thank you for pointing that out to me, as I haven't even noticed this myself. At the moment, I only thought about what I personally thought would be good for my wife rather than what she thinks is good for her. Again, I thank you for your honesty. Update. This is the link to the original post I made a few months ago in case you're wondering what I'm referring to. Hello everyone. I realize that it's been quite some time since I've made this post and I apologize for updating you all so late. If I'm being honest, this post slipped my mind completely. My wife and I were going through our own healing journey and I simply wanted to focus on her. However, things are much better now and both my wife and I are content with our lives. Here's a proper and pretty lengthy update for the ones who were curious about how my wife and I were holding up now. For one, she's working to finish her residency. I'm so incredibly proud of her for pushing through, even with all the odds against her. She's incredibly hardworking and I'll always be there for her. Through the past few months, I had to revisit a lot of areas within our relationship. For one, the status of our relationship was worse than I imagined. There were major life events in her life that I would have never known about if I hadn't broken the growing wall between us. My wife has always been a hard worker, and because simple encouragement always seemed to be enough to boost her morale, I assumed that this was still the case. I was terribly wrong. My wife needed a friend, a shoulder to lean on, a confidant and a lover. But during her very difficult year, I was none of those things. As her wife, I failed to give her the proper love and support she desperately needed and deserved. Not only was she burned out, but because I unintentionally put work before her, I wounded her deeply. Our intimacy was practically non-existent, our conversations never went beyond surface-level subjects, and sometimes, the only time we'd see one another, was when one of us was already long asleep. Whenever I would ask her if she was okay, she always told me she was fine, which I doubted, but since I didn't want to push her, I stopped asking. That's where I made my mistake. Asking wasn't enough. I was foolish. We barely saw each other, did anything together, shared words of endearment or basked in each other's presence. Intimacy just seemed so foreign between us. Like a fool, I thought, hey, I asked if she was okay and she said she was fine. My job here is done. I never once tried to give her the reassurance that I was someone she could depend on, that I was ready to sit and listen, that she could complain to me about the same thing over and over again and that I'd still listen with just as much attention. During a time of great stress, I was everything but helpful. The distance between us was growing pretty rapidly, and it's only after her insistence on becoming a housewife that this veil was lifted. Thanks to my initial post, I received a lot of helpful criticism both online and in real life. It took a lot of personal reflection. Initially, I thought applying what I was told would be a piece of cake, but seeing myself struggle to approach her made me realize how much we had truly grown apart. Little things like her hair, the bags under her eyes, or even her choice of clothes all changed. My wife has always been someone who enjoyed dressing up. Pastel colors are her favorite, weird earrings she finds from God knows where, shoes, makeup, sweets. Little things that made her suddenly stopped appearing. Again, I tried to argue that because she works in a hospital, her style of choice was most likely limited, but even when she was home, it was different. Guilt was eating me alive. My hands would tingle in pain just thinking about the burden she must be carrying all on her own. I decided to stop acting oblivious. Even if I had to do something I deemed as awkward or unnatural, I was going to push through because she deserves better. I began to initiate simple intimacy. If it meant simple hand-holding or working in the same room as her, I did it. I no longer asked if she was okay, but instead let her know that I would always be there for her whenever she needed me. She's my priority. Although it took some time, I was able to coax her into confiding in me again. We did revisit the housewife thing after a few months. She admitted that this feeling came from a deep sense of loneliness, stress, feeling burnt out, and the witness of a child's death. It was her first time witnessing a gradual, inevitable death and had grown quite attached to both the child and the mother who happened to be our age. This made the entire tragedy even more painful. However, my wife is still a doctor and things move quickly. She tried forgetting about it and moving on, but the realization of the weight she carries as a health professional kind of became burdening. She began questioning her years of study, her skill, her abilities. Things that she took great pride in turned into insecurities. Eventually, she came across some aesthetically pleasing life as a housewife on YouTube. The idea of never having to go through such stress and heartbreak seemed so freeing to her. No longer having to see children in poor conditions, focusing on herself, her home, her own personal life and our relationship. To be completely honest, I didn't know how to comfort her. For one, I'm not a health professional. Whenever I curiously looked at her notes, my head would start spinning seeing words that seemed so foreign. Our careers differ so much from one another that I didn't know what would be appropriate to say. What can you possibly say to someone going through this type of heartbreak? With my limited knowledge, I told her that she shouldn't carry that burden and blame herself. People are quick to run to doctors whenever they get the slightest symptoms because they know that a doctor knows best. You naturally bring comfort, a sense of relief and safety. To me, she is no different than a superhero. The joy she brought to that child stuck with her right until her final moments, and that's something she should be proud of. The child was able to live a little longer and experience so much more joy because of her kindness and expertise. We revisited this conversation a lot, and every time I listened. Eventually, she gained a lot more confidence. She relied on her supervisor as well, who's been in the field way before either of us were even born. Seeing her get better day by day made me so incredibly happy. We're at such a great place in our relationship right now. I love hearing her voice, seeing her, being near her and being there for her. I missed her so much. I don't know how we went so long without speaking properly. She's my best friend. My family. I want to say that I wish I had known what to do sooner, but this entire incident was necessary. I believe it is. It brought us so much closer. We're family, and speaking about heavy subjects shouldn't be odd between us. I learned a lot about my wife, myself and our relationship. I'm very happy with how things are going. Although we're still busy, we always find some time for ourselves. We also recently adopted 2 cats. I know a lot of people suggested that perhaps my wife was getting baby fever, but I assure you, our kittens definitely taught us that kids probably aren't meant for us. Not anytime soon anyway. Thank you again for being so kind and honest with me. I'm excited to learn more and deepen our emotional connection, and I can only see a brighter future ahead. Comments. Cat Chris. Honestly, this is very refreshing. I agree with the other posters that your wife does need to set up someone/something to be her support system, like a counselor. I wouldn't be surprised to find out that her work offers these things. It's maintenance like trimming grass or toenails, and should not be viewed as something shameful at all. OOP. Thank you. I absolutely agree. My wife grew up in an environment where mental health is viewed as something that eventually passes like a common cold, so seeking mental health support has never been a thought. However, it is something that we most definitely want to look into now that we've distanced ourselves from said environment. Moving to the second story. After a hurtful argument, my husband won't speak to me. My husband, 32M, and I, 31F, have been together for 7 years and married for 5. We have a 3.5M son and a 1F daughter. His parents passed away when he was 20. To describe it shortly, he despises his father to this day. His father ruined his promising athletic future. He was ranked in the top 10 nationally at his sport, and forced him to focus on school. My husband was accepted to multiple Ivy League schools, and his father refused to pay tuition as well. His father was a control freak, physically abusive towards him, and refused to entertain any opposing opinions. My husband vowed to himself to never be like his father and to always encourage his future kids' interests. He has always been an amazing husband and father to me and our kids. He makes spending time with us a priority, keeps our relationship fun and exciting, and just always makes me feel beautiful and appreciated. We've been going through a bit of a rough patch for a few weeks, and we were arguing about something that wasn't even worth arguing about in hindsight. He said that he was done arguing and walked away mid-conversation. I blurted out, "You're just like your father." As soon as I said that, I immediately tried apologizing and ran to him and tried to hug him. He refused my hug, looked at me, shook his head, and walked out the door. A whole day passed and I hadn't seen or heard from him. I called, texted, and left many voicemails apologizing and asking him to please come home. I reached out to his friends and they had not heard from him either. He walked in drunk at 4 a.m. the next night and collapsed on our couch. I heard him come in and ran downstairs to see him. He was slurring his words and was saying things like, "I'm not like him," and "Why would you say that?" I just held him in my arms all night long and apologized many times. It's been another 2 days and my husband refuses to talk or look at me. He's not even eating anything I make. I have tried talking to him and apologizing. He just looks at me and says, "It's just another thing I have to live with," and walks away from wherever I am. I have no idea how to fix this. I didn't mean to hurt him, but the fact he feels betrayed by the one person he should feel supported and uplifted by, me. Please advise as to what I can do or say to fix this. Update. I got some comments and some messages trashing my husband for walking away from the argument that started all of this and saying he is like his father. I'm not going to say what the argument was about here, but it was pointless and walking away from it was the mature thing to do. He is the best husband and father anyone could ask for. Even when he wasn't talking to me, he was still spending time with and taking care of the kids. Think whatever you want of me, I deserve it, but leave him out of it. On to the actual update. My husband came home after work the next day and bought takeout for dinner. We had dinner as a family for the first time in a few days and put the kids to bed together. I asked if we could talk. I apologized and admitted that I was tired of all the arguments we were having lately, and in the heat of the moment, I wanted to hurt him and said what would hurt the most. He said that he knows he is nothing like his father and why I thought he was. I promised that I don't believe that at all and told him all the great things he does for me and our children. I told him that I would see a therapist to figure out what made me say what I did and to make sure it never happened again. The conversation lasted about an hour and a half and ended with him telling me that it would take some time but we would be okay as long as I never compared him to his father again. We kissed and slept together for the first time since the incident. In the next few days, there was still a certain coldness about him. He was still happy to spend time with the kids but was still somewhat cold with me. I wrote him a letter telling him how much I loved and appreciated him and promised to never hurt him again, and slipped it into his lunch bag. He came home with flowers for me that day. Our normal vibe has somewhat returned and it looks like we will be good going forward.